when I'm getting to the bag, ayy. Got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast, ayy. Ayy, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss, ayy.
Hey guys, before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you know it is brought to you by the NMFTA. Let me ask you a question. Do you ship LTL freight? Then listen up, because the NMFC changes went live on July 19th, and they're the biggest updates in the history of freight classification. Now more than ever, accuracy matters. That's why carriers, shippers, and brokers alike are turning to Class IT Plus, the NMFTA's new digital platform for real-time NMFC data. Stop guessing, start classifying smarter, and quote freight with confidence. It's time to get your ship together because the NMFC changes are already here. Learn more at nmfcchanges.com and get started with Class IT Plus at classitplus.com. Just do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you. This episode is brought to you by SPI Logistics, the premier freight agent logistics firm in North America. For over 40 years, SPI has been diligently building the most successful freight agent network to provide first-class relationships for our shippers, receivers, and carrier partners. We are more than another transportation network. We are a dedicated team of professionals united by one singular purpose, and that is to expedite our agents' success. All of our agents are set up for success on day one, as they are provided with a full suite of support staff that is ready to assist them with everything from after-hours emergencies to financial and administrative needs on a no-fee basis. This way, you can focus on continuing to grow your business. There is no financial risk to start, and you have the ability to earn up to 75% in commissions. If you are looking to take control of your financial future and build your business with the backing of one of the most successful logistics firms in North America, visit www.spi3pl.com to learn more. Do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I do say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I got a couple of very special guests for you guys that are coming back on the show. We're going to be talking about my absolute favorite event of the year, and that's the NMFTA Cybersecurity Conference. They've been talking about cyber. They've been predicting a lot of this stuff years before everybody else was getting caught up to it. And as somebody who is a tech novice, being able to go and learn in that environment to protect my customers' freight moving forward, it's an invaluable experience out there. So I want to welcome Mr. Joe Ohr and Ben Wilkins back on the show today to break all this down. So gentlemen, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Happy to be here.
So we're within a month of this already. Conference is coming up, Long Beach, September 29th through October 1st. And, you know, it's like a lot of the topics at the conference, it's like eerily timely for a lot of the stuff that's going on right now out there. And, you know, Joe, you travel around a lot talking about a lot of things that you guys are tackling at the NMFTA out there. What is one of those things now that is is there like just a general acceptance out there in the market, in the industry, that like, all right, we get it. Cyber is a massive issue, cyber crimes. I mean, I just read a stat that like the FBI reported it's like $17 billion a year in reported theft through cyber crimes and everything.
I still think it's not given the attention that it should be given. You know, I saw where Atri was doing a new poll where they're asking folks, you know, what are the things that, you know, keeps them up at night, so to say. And I'm curious where cyber ends up on that list. You hear a lot about cargo theft, but not in all sectors. You only hear about it in certain sectors. And I guess as I travel, one of the things that always amazes me is maybe the attendance at some of the cyber presentations versus other presentations. I think that it still needs to be increased as far as awareness.
Mhm. Like, is it, again, like, because it's not that physical, it's not like somebody kicked in your door and took anything from you. Do you think that because it is essentially like a faceless crime? Do you think that's why people don't look at it at like the threat that they should?
I think it's that, and then people don't talk about it much. I mean, when there's physical things like somebody kicks in the door, people are always talking about it. It's still not something where if you're a victim of cyber, it's still not something where we see everybody coming forward and saying, "Hey, this is what happened to me." It's almost like there's a sense of, "Hey, this is my fault." There's a sense of embarrassment, which there shouldn't be, but I still think that it's not something they openly discuss with their peers. Obviously the people that come to the conference do, which is why we love the conference so much. But there's still a lot of people that just don't have those discussions when things happen, like they do the physical crimes that you made mention of.
Mhm. Ben, again, I've mentioned this every time you come on the show. I'm like, you have such a unique experience in the fact that like you've seen all of that stuff out there, and now you're on the cyber side of things. What is, and then when we're tying in, like cybersecurity, freight theft, and everything that's going on out there, like we were talking before the show, like they had just released data that like $111 million in data center freight was stolen. And it's like they're testing new theories out there. And then also in regards to the amount of like theft events are down, but the value has increased. Is this like these last couple of years, is this kind of like that was just a big trial run to where it's like they're just getting smarter in their approach to where it's like, why steal 100 loads when we can just steal this one?
Yeah, the approach is definitely becoming more sophisticated and more targeted. We've seen a decrease in kind of the general commodities. The commodities of opportunity do seem to be going down, but what we're seeing, the incidents that are occurring are highly targeted, and they're targeting the high value freight. Often this stuff isn't even marked as a high value shipment. It's just miscellaneous computer components, but it turns out those are high end memory chips or the other graphic card components, things like that that are in huge demand right now, and the value of these is through the roof. So we're seeing a skewing in the numbers this year where actual incidents have come down, but the average value of the shipment stolen is over $500,000, and that's because of these higher value shipments that are being targeted regularly. One shipment, like you mentioned, is that's going to skew the numbers for the whole quarter when we think about it that way. But it's those kinds of sophisticated targetings require access. They require information. They require visibility into how freight is moving, and that's where the cyber component often comes in. And that's a foothold into the systems, a breach of an email account, so they're in the communications chain. That's how they're getting this information.
Mhm.
It's different than the old tail a truck and see what they're hauling kind of method.
Yeah, and because to me, it's almost like, how can you pinpoint where they're gaining access? Because there's so many vulnerabilities out there. We had broken down e-logs on the show. ELD manufacturers. There's like essentially six, but there's like 600 companies, but they all use the same interface. And so it's like, have we just made it easier for them, or is it so easy with the right? I hate to even give any of these guys credit, but it's like the right cyber criminals are like, they're sending out 10,000 things at once. And then they get that one pattern. And then they've noticed so many vulnerabilities inside of these systems that just allows them to jump around. So it's like, you can't necessarily point, hey, we're getting all of this information off of a load board. That is where all the, instances are happening.
Yeah, I think this actually kind of indirectly makes a really good point. And to Joe's point earlier, we need to be sharing this information, because when there's a vulnerability discovered in one system and there's an exploit that works, or there's a cargo theft that's successful, we need to share that lesson learned with our peers and help harden the entire industry, because that's exactly what's happening. They're finding a method that works, and they're finding, because there's a lot of concentration in the vendors and the tools that are used in this industry, And so when a vulnerability is discovered or a method is discovered that works well, it's going to be used everywhere there's a trucking industry target that kind of gets on the radar of these threat actors, because they're doing exactly what you said. They're casting out thousands of hooks and seeing what catches, right? But once they start kind of assessing whose systems have gained access to and understanding, okay, this is a trucking company. There's a freight angle here as well. Then they're going to be using those techniques that they've learned from other incidents for sure.
Mhm.
And just to add to what Ben said, it's not only communicating the ways that they've been successful, but the ways that they've been unsuccessful also. Because some of these carriers have very, very good operations to prevent this, and maybe they see a new way that somebody's trying to get in, but they've stopped it. That's just as important as someone who successfully got in. So it's important to share that information, successful or unsuccessful, if it looks like a new method or a new approach into the system.
Mhm. And I mean, because like I'm looking forward to Todd Florence. He was on the show with us, Joe, and being with a company like Estes, and then the opening panel with Estes and ArcBest, two of the largest LTL companies that are out there, and kind of sharing this. And this is why it's like, I think and then you guys also, to kind of tie in the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub and everything, like the whole point of this is to share all of this information out there so we can stay ahead of it. And is that, I mean, because I know just on our conversation with Todd alone, like they were very forthcoming with their event that happened at Estes. Do you think, like, are you kind of surprised that a company like Estes coming out and like putting all their cards on the table, that there's still companies where they're still trying to hold this stuff in and not share this information?
Yeah, I am. I mean, and again, I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it. Kudos to Estes. I mean, Todd, the way that they managed that event, not just Todd, but the entire Estes Corporation was excellent. My guess is, and I don't know this for sure, but somewhere one of their lawyers got really nervous with the way that they did that. But I think that sometimes we have to put that aside and say, hey, we're going to do what's best for the industry and what's best for our company, and that's what they did. And the opening, one of the opening sessions that we have, we've got ArcBest, we've got Estes, we've also got FedEx, and it's a very, very unique perspective. Estes, they've been around for a while. They're doing, they were impacted. So, Todd's got a unique perspective. Every time Todd and I speak, you kind of learn something new. And then from an ArcBest perspective, they're creating technology. And I think that's exciting, whether it be the forklifts or the new technology. I mean, here's a company that's a carrier, but I love to go visit at Manifest because I want to see what they're developing. So that perspective is unique. And then of course FedEx with the spinoff, he started from scratch, and so it's like, okay, how do you build this? And with his background and experience, I think that's a really good story to tell. So it's probably always my favorite session, just because we like to bring people in with a diverse background, but also different challenges. And I think although the challenges are the same, they're a lot different because of one's building, one's maintaining but getting better, continuing to evolve, and then the other again has a very big footprint in the technology space.
I'm trying to, just from my non-technical background on things, it seems like there's probably like a hacker SOP out there where it's like they're able to follow the same thing because nobody is seemingly kind of like, again, just sharing this information that's out there where it's like they're able to follow it. And then have you guys noticed any patterns where it's like we're almost making it, and I hate to say making it easier on them, but like we're not really changing our ways. And, and if I go into like the ELD conversation that we had earlier this year and how there's like essentially 6 companies, even though there's a couple hundred ELD providers, but they're all using the same operating system. Is it laziness that has allowed this to happen?
Well, I don't know if I'd go quite so far as to say laziness. I think there's a lot of it comes down to the education, the awareness. As far as you're talking SOPs from the bad actor or the hacker side. I prefer the bad actor. Don't want to give all hackers a bad name. There's good ones too, but from the bad actor side. There are standard operating procedures, and they almost always start with social engineering, and yet we keep clicking on links, and we keep facing those same challenges in our internal teams, where creating a culture of cybersecurity awareness is not prioritized necessarily in the way that it needs to be. So again, I don't think it's laziness. I think it's a lack of awareness, and I think that's part of the reason that events like this are so important, is to raise that awareness level, and to send people home with the knowledge and the skills to make substantial changes in their own organizations, and actually implement some of these techniques from a defensive perspective in their home organizations.
I was going to say from the social engineering aspect of things that are out there. I mean, like it's been, I think this is like my 5th cybersecurity conference, and that's been like the main topic every single time. It's like almost alarming how don't click the link is like just like thrown to the wayside. It's like you talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. Is that still the main thing that gets into people's systems? Is they are clicking on those links out there, or is there any other form where it's kind of like evolved into that people should start paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, social engineering in general is broader than just the phishing email with a link you shouldn't click. I mean, there's a lot of techniques, and they've gotten a lot more sophisticated and kind of sneaky in the way that they're doing this. There's a couple of threat actor groups out there that are doing things like help desk impersonation over the phone. They're contacting folks after they've bombarded them with spam, and they're explaining that they're from the help desk, and they've seen that there's a problem with your email account and they want to help. And somebody who's in the middle of putting out fires and operations and at the speed transportation moves, they don't have time for computer trouble. They don't have time for issues in their email that might cause them to miss a load or something like that. And so that's been really successful, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no link that's being clicked there. That's information that's being given verbally to the bad actor. So there's things like that, and there's a number of other approaches, but it really comes down to understanding the tells that all social engineering attempts have. Sense of urgency, fear of authority, these kind of classic tells of social engineering, and teaching people to be aware of that. But it's an uphill fight. Where human nature is to trust, and especially in an industry that's historically been a lot of handshakes and your word counts. That's how business has been transacted for decades in this industry. And so that's a hard process to unlearn. And it's unfortunate that we need to go to a verify and then trust. But that's really the direction we have to be going. And I think that's part of the challenge we've seen with getting around this social engineering problem.
And to add to that, I think the other thing we've seen an increase in is sort of the new hires, right? You're a new hire, you don't know people, it's a big organization, you get a call and they've picked this up out of LinkedIn because you've changed. Hey, I'm taking down my green banner. I'm starting at so-and-so. Well, then all of a sudden the bad actor reaches out saying, hey, I'm the help desk. I need to do something on your computer. The new hire doesn't want to ask questions, right? The new hire doesn't want to start challenging or appear quote unquote, stupid, right? So they go ahead and let them in. And again, I think when we started the cyber conference, it was very basic things. It was basic hygiene with social engineering. And everybody's like, yeah, I get this. Because I remember, look, I wasn't here, but I remember looking at the first one thinking, well, yeah, the people that come to this conference, they're going to know that. They're going to know to look for the broken English. They're going to know all this. But now it's so much more complicated and so much more sophisticated. There's a significantly sized organization that what they do is cyber. That's all they do. Look for cyber threats, and they got breached, or at some level, and it came in through social engineering. And Ben and I were trading emails on that this morning. I'm like, man, if one of those guys, it got through their social engineering, what chance does the rest of us have? Because it is getting more sophisticated. They're getting better and better. And they talk, they communicate, they work together. So, they're finding the ways in. So, I know it was mentioned last year at the conference with LinkedIn being a major tool. And I think that still continues to be, even in our size. We'll see some basic attempts based on new hires, because we'll do a new hire announcement. And within a couple days, these guys are saying, hey, Joe needs this, or, Ben needs that. And it's like, no, it's not, it wasn't us.
Is there any mode, if we're just looking at it from a pure data perspective here, is there any mode, is it ocean, intermodal, LTL, full truckload, that has shown to be more vulnerable from a cyber attack perspective, or like a freight theft perspective, that they're going after? Or is it kind of just like even across the board?
It's a really good question. I don't know if I would be able to give you a hard number on like the percentages or dollar amounts broken down like that. But I know in the trucking portion in particular, the ground transport, once it's off the, out of the ports and off the intermodal stage, we are seeing a significant volume of the cargo theft at that point. Rail has always had issues as well. And that's kind of due to the nature of the locations that a lot of the trains are stopped and things like that are more vulnerable. But we definitely see a significant exposure on the trucking side. And I think part of that has to do with the smaller scale of a lot of the operations, the fractured nature of this portion of the transport vertical. It gives a lot of soft attack surface, and easier targets, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. You look at some of the modes that are out there, and obviously intermodal. I'm not here to rip on intermodal, but like that ain't changing, right? Like they're not building too many new rail yards out there across the country and stuff like that. And that's the one mode that has always fascinated me, and it almost ties into like that's got to be more of an inside job than I think a lot of people are giving credit to. And I say that because it's like, every time I see a train go by, last time I checked, there's not one container on there. There's like thousands potentially on some of these trains, depending on where they're going. How do they know the one? Like that's not just blind luck that there's a train stopped in rural Arizona at a transfer station, and they just happen to hit the one container with high value tech components or TVs or stuff like that. To me, that's just like, that's the simplicity of it. And it's almost back to like what you were saying about the new hire notifications out there. Like, how easy is that to track that stuff? And it's almost too easy to a trained person inside of the cyber aspect of things, where they're like, there's no way people are falling for that.
But I think too, you bring up with insider threats, you bring up a good point with new hires, and that is, before the new hire, the vetting process is hugely important. Understanding the background and that the individual is who they purport to be, and doing your due diligence ahead of time. So that's from kind of a classic insider threat perspective. But then, I forget the movie, but the old line, the call's coming from inside the house. It might not be a malicious insider. It might be an insider who's been compromised through social engineering. It might be an internal system that's been compromised. So again, that internal information is how the targeting is happening, but there's a couple of different ways that it's being gathered.
Mhm. Now, this is just random, and I just thought of this. Do you think the rise in, like, I'm not saying flock cameras is the problem, but do you think like a rise in that is almost adding vulnerabilities in there where it's a lot, like it's easier to track stuff, right? Like if you look at a lot of the high value cargo that's out there, because anybody who's moved freight in their life knows that there's unmarked warehouses that are out there, high security clearance, where now with the increase in cameras like Flock and other systems, that it's like it's almost easier to pinpoint it if they're able to gain access to one of those, small budget cities that doesn't have a cyber system in place to kind of counteract a lot of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, being able to access that information, because I know I talked to somebody about the flock cameras, and it's like, well, these trucks all have telematics. Every people know where they're at, where they're going, what they're pulling, the bill of lading. Most of that's in the telematics system. But one of the things that you bring up a point that I didn't think about, and I talked about unauthorized access, but it was more people that are searching without, that they shouldn't be. But from a cyber perspective, that is interesting. They could suddenly have access to something that they did not have before, which is basically insight into the truck's history, its whereabouts, its patterns, and some of the warehouses that you may not want people to know that's where you're dropping off. Ben?
Yeah, I think, how I would think about that is every time we add new technology or a new component to our processes or our internal stack, we are adding attack surface. We're adding a potential area for exploitation. And so whether that's flock cameras or, any other new tool, we need to understand the vulnerabilities that tool or service might have, and be sure that we can secure those before we deploy them, because we don't want to just add the latest technology and give people access to new internal systems without understanding what we're opening up for risk.
Do you think that this is an opportunity? I'm trying to look at it from like a positive here about like the opportunity with the advancements in the AI dialers or like the AI receptionists and stuff like that out there. Do you think people are going to be able to leverage that to almost make a more secure network out there if they're going to employ AI dispatchers or whatever that looks like? Or is that another impersonation effect that is going to probably be exploited if it's not already being exploited at a high level?
So I'm going to give you a funny personal story on that. So there was a competition recently out there. You may have seen there was a brokerage that was training an AI sales agent.
Mm-hmm.
And they put a competition out that if you could get the agent to sell you a load for more than the going price, they'd give you the difference as prize money. Now, I did a stint in brokerage sales and was not very successful at it. We'll just put it that way. I was not somebody you'd hire, Chris. So, but I was able to very quickly trick this agent into providing a higher rate than intended. So I think the example there is just that with persistence and with a little bit of creativity, these agents aren't infallible. These agents can be tricked. They can be manipulated. We're still kind of feeling out the edges of AI security in general. And so I think it's important to understand that when we add these tools, again, we may be helping in one respect, but we may be opening up a risk factor that we didn't have before, or a way in that we didn't have before. So we just need to be careful with those.
Yeah, because like I'm still, and I find so many conflicting reports on this. And again, this isn't can you guys definitively answer it, but is it even legal to have AI phone operators for your business? I've heard conflicting reports that it is not a legal transaction out there if a AI agent makes a deal on a company's behalf. I mean, have you guys heard of anything like that, or is that just all internet theory that's burning up across the board?
I have not, Ben.
Okay.
So there's a couple examples that I've heard where, you know, like Air Canada, I know had a chat bot that provided a bunch of discounts and refunds that it wasn't supposed to, and they had to honor that.
Mhm.
You know, and there's a lot of contention around that point as far as, you know, what authority does an automated system have to act on behalf of the organization? So I've kind of heard the same thing you have, Chris, that both sides of this, and I don't think we've got to the bottom of that issue yet.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, that's another thing to kind of keep in mind with a lot of this stuff. But, you know, again, I look at, and this is why I'm so high on this event, no matter what, is like a lot of the getting in the room with some of the chief information officers and chief technology officers of these companies it's an invaluable experience to sit down and hear from them, because, you know, you might be looking at it is your business might not be there today, but in a couple of short years, your entire organization is going to look a lot different. And there's going to be a time when, you know what, you might be looking to employ or deploy a lot of the technology that a lot of these larger providers have, because it's going to be accessible to you down there. And it's so important to get in these rooms and make this happen, and listen to these conversations and prepare yourself for the future. Because it's like, you know, again, you just look at cyber enabled cargo theft. That's like a thing of the past now, even though it's like a big thing out there. It's like they're already evolving. So it's like you have to stay in front of this. And this is why industry collaboration is so imperative out there, because that's the only way this is ever going to be curbed. Is we have to collaborate, we have to speak, find out what we're doing that's working. And then, Joe, one of your valuable points from earlier is hey, how didn't they gain access? How can we help protect that information out there? But you guys, thank you so much for joining. Come to the NMFTA Cybersecurity Conference, you guys. It's in Long Beach, September 29th through October 1st out there. There's a lot of great events. Fellas, thank you guys so much for joining. That is going to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you got value in what you heard and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling ambitious, rank it on iTunes and Spotify, because if you see value, your network's going to see it as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Came back with a bang, window down, yelling out money, anything. Hey, ooh, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when I'm getting to the back. Hey.